Hello, my name's Colleen Getty, and I'm with The Room to Write, and we're doing another episode of the Journey of a Story series, where we follow the journey of an author from idea to published product. And that usually is a book, and in this case it is a book. And we're here with Andrew Hacket, a picture book author who is not just one, but three books coming out in like a 2-month period. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. And we're gonna, because there's so many awesome books to pick from, we're gonna start with the one that's coming out first, Ollie, the Acorn and the Mighty Idea. And first we're just gonna do what we usually do, which is like, what's the real writer Andrew look like, sound like, whatever, when you're writing? Are you, in a studio that's built for writers, or a cafe smoking a cigarette?
Right.
Or what are you doing? How do you write?
So I have a lovely office in my basement, away from the rest of the family, that I hardly ever use. It is there. It looks gorgeous. The real bit of it is wherever I can and whenever I can. I have 3 kids. I'm a 2nd grade teacher. Time to write is not built into my schedule. So often, if I'm on deadline or really into something, it is early morning, late night when the house is quiet. Oftentimes it's on the sideline at the soccer field. It is in the car while I'm waiting for someone to come out of, for carpool. It is whenever and wherever. And since these books have been in progress, that amount of writing has totally decreased because those energies are spent towards promoting and the back end of the publishing piece.
Right.
So,
okay, so you're writing anywhere you can do it. Is it napkins? What, do you have a computer? Are you talking into your phone? What do you?
It depends. Beginning phases, often I have journals, tons and tons of journals, scribbled ideas, sketches, not an illustrator by any means, but any way to get the idea kind of captured. A lot of notes on my phone, a lot of voice to text while driving to not let that spark of an idea kind of just dissipate into thin air, because it happens and it's the absolute worst. So that's how I usually get started. As far as actual writing, typically on my Chromebook, so I can just kind of travel and go using Google Docs, so it's accessible wherever and whenever.
Okay, so it always looks so easy when it's in book form.
Yep.
But we have an idea that there's a lot more that went into this than just poof. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about where did this idea come from? Is this the very first of your books that you thought you were writing, or, maybe a little bit about the timeline, anything you want to roll in on there?
Absolutely. So I will say, I think often writers will talk about how they've always had this love of reading and literacy, and they've always been a writer. That's not my go-to answer. I see little pieces when I look back of, I did this thing in elementary school, or there was this feedback from someone that kind of kept the spark of being a writer alive, but I wasn't one of those, I just love books type people. I've had a couple creative writing. In high school there was a class, in college there was a class that kind of kept that I think I want to do this. Most of it was being a teacher, being a 2nd grade teacher. I'm surrounded by books. My education of what picture books are has come through my day job without me really trying to go there. It wasn't until, I guess the first story I'd say was probably through teaching my students and modeling for them how to write a fiction story, was where maybe that first real idea came together. And it was about a tie-dyed egg left over from Easter, so fitting timing, that has a neon green bendy straw sticking out of it as a means of seeing, kind of like Periscope.
Oh, awesome.
And that morphed into, he didn't know what he was, kind of like an identity journey. And it was atrocious. So many words, so just terribly written from what I know now as an author. But kind of moving forward, it was the pandemic hit and COVID. I had 3 young kids at the time, and I took a year off of teaching to be home with them.
Right.
I quickly learned that my brain is not suited for stay-at-home dad life, that I need to be busy. But
I think a lot of us learned that.
Yes. And what that afforded me, though, was I finally had the the brain space to learn something new. While I was being a timekeeper for my kids,
Right.
I was able to dive into the world of kidlit, mostly online and through social media, and figure out how do I go from, legal pads written with ideas and documents on my computer to accessing a publisher, or like I didn't know what a literary agent was at the time.
Right.
I didn't know what a critique group was.
And this is just 2020.
This is 2020. I began taking it seriously.
That was a
So yeah, in
big
terms of like
education in a
the
short
writing
time.
world goes, these things happen remarkably quickly compared to many people who have wanted to get into it and have been successful. I think they've had a much longer road of getting there.
Yeah, much more like an actual acorn growing
just
into an
real
oak
slow
tree.
process. Yes.
Wow. So you didn't waste any time, clearly. So you were like, I like to write. Where does the part become? All of a sudden I'm going to focus on publishing an actual book, and what was that? That must have happened
for
all
me,
very.
It was, dabbling in writing and having this always somewhat of a creative element. That when I was younger, I would draw, make comics, things like that. There was always some bit of it, and I think a big part of it also was. Maybe why I got into teaching too was I didn't want to grow up. A little Peter Pan syndrome of I didn't want to be maturing and giving up cartoons and my imagination, and writing, and especially writing for kids, was a way to maintain that, and teaching kids was a way to maintain that I've taught second grade for 17 years. I've been a 7 and 8-year-old for a lot of my life, and it lets me keep that connection with kids. It lets me keep that connection with what they enjoy, and kind of try to bring that in. The idea for trying to be published, I think, was I needed the goal that, and not everyone does. For me, success with writing looked like getting a traditionally published book. That I could have gone the route, and lots of people do, and it really suits them for self-publishing. I wanted the satisfaction and I wanted the challenge of, can I accomplish this really hard to accomplish thing? And I was very, very fortunate, and a lot of serendipitous, wonderful things happening to kind of line up to make these books be real.
And so did you have your own in-house editorial team with your second graders where you're like, hey, look at this story, what do you think about it?
My second graders feel so proud of themselves when I bring a book. I'm like, you're the first ones to ever have seen this. So absolutely a lot of built-in cheerleaders.
Did they give you feedback?
It's a biased crowd. They think everything's wonderful. I'm like, you don't have to. These are 3 very different books.
Yeah.
So I get a little bit of that feedback, but I know it is not necessarily the most honest of feedback. My wife is also a second grade teacher in a different town. So I find more if I let my teacher friends share the books, I get a little bit more honest feedback from it. And then even with my own children, they're kind of just like, all right, whatever, you're working on another book. The magnitude of it and the accomplishment of it is a little bit lost on them in terms of giving me that feedback.
Right.
They would love to brag about it to other people. Like, yeah, Dad, you got another book. Okay, whatever.
Right. They don't know, like the rest of us, it doesn't happen that quickly.
Right. And we've tried to show them. We go to lots and lots of author events, but it's just sort of what they've now grown up with.
Right.
Yep, you've got your, different colored felt tip markers, and you're writing all over something, and you've constantly got your computer with you.
And so there's 2 things, try to hold me accountable to make sure I mention both. But one thing is you're just sort of touching on is building a community, and where I feel like you'd have some interesting stuff to say about that, since you sort of just came to this, right? So it wasn't something that's sort of collected over time. You were able to very intentionally decide how you're going to do that. So, but before because I'll forget this other question, when you were talking about actually the writing of your book, I was noticing at the beginning there's a lot of words there for a picture book, and I'm just interested in hearing a little bit about the actual process of, was this, like, basically, was it what you gave them got printed, or
Right.
what's the process back and forth on that?
Not at all. The core ideas, the heart of the story, most of the words stayed very much as we submitted to the publisher. The editor, Kayla Tostavin, at Page Street Kids, loved the story, connected to it right away. But there was some bits of, we wanted a little bit more of the motivation, but behind the action that was going to occur in the story. So it's about two characters. Ollie's our main character. He's small in stature, wishes to be bigger, and his next door neighbor, whose name is Everett, and bullies him, is not kind to him, through a whole lot of plant-related puns. But
I'm a gardener, so I'll appreciate that.
What was lacking in the manuscript that we submitted was some of the intention. We wanted a little bit more of the backstory of, why is Everett acting this way? What is causing this? And that was missing from the initial manuscript that we submitted.
Okay, so quick question.
Yes.
When I think of picture books, I think of very young children, but this almost seems like if there was a spectrum of ages, this would be sort of maybe closer to your second, third grade readers. Is that true? Or?
Reader-wise, yes. Okay. As a read aloud, it can go younger. I've got author visits lined up in the near future, and that's a place of, like, there are some parts of that, and even Kaz witnesses the illustration. She's incredible, author and illustrator. And the way she brought it to life is beyond my imagination. You know, someone gets eaten by a tree, but it could be a little much for a younger audience.
Right.
There is at the back, and it's a thing we also revised in a lot further into the process, some back matter, which is about the different things our main character eats to grow into his tree form of the acorn, soil, water, and a part of the sun. So a little nonfiction information about, connected to those elements, but also a bit of a warning, like, we don't eat acorns, we don't do these things, and here's the reason why, in a humorous, comical, dropping a few scientific facts along the way, just to, you know, I don't need to be the reason a child makes a bad choice.
Right. So it's sort of like you can pick and choose what, depending on the age that you're reading, there'll be different things you'll get out of it.
Absolutely. And I think for a question that's come up a lot lately as I talk about the three books are, you know, they're so different, but is there a common through thread? And when I was writing them, they're not intentionally. What I found in kind of reflecting on it is there's definitely a piece related to self-acceptance, identity, and a lot of, like, social emotional learning. Just being okay with who you are kind of floats through all three books in very different ways. Okay.
And so where did I mean, we won't overwhelm you with all the books to talk about, but, like, if even just briefly, did you get all the ideas from totally different ways, or did they just pop in your head, or were you noticing things with your students that you felt like, this is the topic that needs to be addressed?
So at least two of them. So Ollie and Curly Locks were both kind of a product of my own children. So Ollie was summertime conversation with my kids, just hanging out about what happens if you ate a watermelon seed. That good old, right? Watermelon's gonna grow in your belly. And my brain then went to, what if you swallowed something else? What if it was an acorn? Which was kind of that initial piece for Ollie. Around the same time, I had been brainstorming a story about a character named Twig, who was going to be a very small character, and all the things people thought he couldn't do, but he actually could do as a result of his smaller size. So those two bits kind of meld it together a little. There's also a fair bit of the drafting process where the old lady who swallowed a fly came to mind, of the cause and effect and the continually eating more and more things for dramatic results. So that's where that one came from. And Curly Locks was really based off my daughter, my middle child. She has curly hair, and when she was younger, she hated it. It didn't grow long enough to put into a ponytail. She just, couldn't see what good there was in having curly hair. And for me also, I guess the teaching side is I teach fairy tales. I teach fractured fairy tales. So that just kind of became a natural fit. And when the idea of the name Curly Locks came to mind, I was like, well, this is a very clear path of where I have to go with this story.
Okay, and then Hope in the Sea, might as well round it out.
Hope in the Sea was more emotion-based than the other ones. These had Ollie and Curly Locks had very, like, I can pinpoint that inspiration. Hope in the Sea, I had been participating in some online contests of like 100-word stories, 50-word stories. And I've been doing a lot with anthropomorphized, I can never say the word. You know which word.
Animal stuff.
Yeah, and personifying settings. And so I knew I wanted to write a story a bit about big feelings and loneliness. I grew up in Rhode Island, going to the beach all the time, so that setting kind of played a part naturally for me. But it was really focused on the emotion. And while the first two stories are more humorous, more lighthearted, this is written lyrically much different style than the other two, which was kind of how I thought, or who I thought I was as a writer when I first started. So it was surprising to me that these other two stories were my first ones to sell.
Right.
Because it's not who I thought I was as a writer at the time.
Learn that through the publication process, right?
Absolutely.
And so I just want to point out that that's interesting, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, like, these sort of came genuinely from out of thin air, it seemed like, in your daily living. But that sounds like it was sort of the product of an exercise or something.
Yes.
And, as someone who encourages people to write, and that we do writing exercises that seem very random sometimes, you just never know when some of those exercises can pull something that actually will be a good story.
Absolutely. When I started taking writing seriously and I wanted to learn more about it, a lot of how I did it was through social media. Because as much as I was in a position to kind of pick my network of people, it was COVID.
Right.
I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't meet with anyone. But at the same time, that opened up this world of possibilities, because through online, we didn't have to geographically be close to one another. So I've had critique partners in Hawaii, on the West Coast, that like we're trying to figure out meeting times because we're in different time zones from one another. But when I first started, one of the things that was most influential and helpful was contests. And there was a lot on Twitter at the time where they're short form. It's sometimes there's a prompt, a picture prompt, sometimes it's a bit more open-ended, but they were, the smallest is 50 words and the largest word count I think was 250.
Okay.
But there's something very freeing about doing it for a contest. Was like, well, if I don't get anything, I don't get anything. It was a bit of a throwaway. So I have a constant editor in my mind. I'm not someone who can sit and freely just let the words come out. I want to revise. I want them to be perfect. I at times will set timers for myself of I'm writing for the next 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So like I have to get rid of that editor. I just need to get words on the page. But those contests were where I had to cut words a lot. And so in writing picture book, often we have a really small word count. We're aiming for like 500 words.
Okay.
And that's where I learned to really cut and be a bit vicious with the cutting of you don't have the space for the words.
Right.
They had to go.
Yeah.
That also is where I kind of found this style of the lyrical writing, because to tell a full story in about 100 words, I was writing in fragments. I was writing just the most pertinent, the most impactful word choice I could do. And I found that really resonated with me.
Yeah. And if you want to edit all the time, it probably freed you up even more, because you're not supposed to follow any rules, basically.
Absolutely. But I would say, like, for Ollie and Curly Locks, those were much harder books for me to write. Okay. And they went under a lot more revision. Hope, not that it was perfect the first time it came out, but my lyrical style just flows a lot more. And when it came to publication purposes and editors, the other two had large revisions. Hope essentially is published as it was submitted.
Wow.
A couple words here and there. But it's just interesting for me to kind of reflect on how my different styles of writing kind of come out, and my writing process almost is varied based on the tone of the book I'm writing.
Yeah, and I guess there is, I mean, as writers in any kind of art form, there's a point where you can start to overthink things and over-revise, and it's like that you just, it's hard to find that sweet spot.
Yeah, and I'll say with Ollie in particular, I fought with that book so much, that manuscript, because I was still new. And as much as with my second grade class, we are free and we can be out there and have fun and be absurd, there was some part of me that said, some like rule stuck in the back of my head that I had to put limits on myself as a writer of what was allowed or not allowed within the book. And I already was having a boy turn into a tree monster. So I thought, like, I've already pushed it too far. And so I fought for a long time with the middle and end of the story because I knew I wanted Ollie to see that he didn't need to be big to be powerful. I also knew I wanted him to have a means to see Everett on a human level and not just as a bully, because often our bullies are bullies for a reason, that they themselves are probably having a hard time and not getting the support that they need.
Yeah.
So I tried all sorts of ways, trying to make it so it appeared Everett was afraid of the dark, things like that, and they just weren't working.
And you're a teacher, so you're really probably thinking really hard about the audience that's in your classroom.
Absolutely. And I think my wife just got sick of me talking about it one day. She's like, you know what needs to happen. Like, no, I can't do that. She's like, but you know what needs to happen. I can't have him eat another child. She's like, you just do. And that was one of those places where I was in my way as a writer of not even drafting it.
Right.
Like, open a new document, just get it out, see how it works.
Giving it a chance.
And I was so reluctant to do that. And when I finally did, that's what connected all the pieces. That it was a big enough event for Ollie to have that remorse and to see Everett as a peer and as a human in those struggles that he might be going through.
Right.
And I really think the absurdity of that book is one of the main reasons it has become a book. It stood out.
Well, and I think you're having the same problem a lot of people have, almost all writers, is you're thinking almost too far ahead, right?
Yes.
Like, you don't want to do this next thing because then that's going to dictate what happens over here. So, you know, I said to my critique group one time, I tried to think of it as trying on a dress in the fitting room.
Yeah.
Like, just try it. And then you can always change it. You can like, you don't have to wear it. So it sounds like your wife convinced you.
Just
try it
go for
on and see how it fits, and that was what made the difference. So.
And I think now as I start to write new things, I'm a lot less apprehensive and just a lot more free to write what I want to write, because there are so many stories to be told. And even if it's the same concept or basic idea, the way you write it and the way I write it are going to be vastly different takes on that.
Right.
And at the end of the day, whatever gets published, if it has my name on it, I want it to reflect the words and the messages I want to be sending.
Right.
So just trying to be open and free to that.
And I mean, it stands out that Hope in the Sea, you say, is most like you, most the style you pictured yourself as, and yet you had the least amount of time. It was one of these like, hurry up and get it out kind of things. And so, you know, there is just a magic to that, you know, they say writer's deadline is a writer's best friend for a reason. And that forced you to just go with your gut almost more than your head.
Absolutely. I think too, there's a place where the more you write, and not necessarily the more you have published, but the more that you write, I built a confidence in myself. I was still in this like baby writer phase of learning who I was as a writer. So I didn't have that confidence. I was looking for the approval of my critique partners and my critique groups. I needed them to tell me that something was good or right or to change it. And initially, I would take that advice kind of blindly. The more I've gotten into things, and also your critique groups develop as you go. They get to know who you are and what your style is. But the more I've gotten into it, my newer drafts, there's so much more confidence in them. There's less rounds of critique groups before I'm willing to send it off to my agent, because I just feel a lot more ownership of it. I feel way more secure that the writing's not going to be perfect at all, but that the concepts are solid, or that it's a idea I feel really strongly about that I want to make sure I have my agents kind of seal approval on, so that we can make this book happen.
Right. And speaking of critique group, that's definitely sort of the acorn of a community of writers that you want to see yourself in, and not just see yourself, but you almost need in order to thrive. So I don't know if you want to talk a little, we sort of touched on it, and then we went revision wise, but about like actually gathering that group or community around you. How did you do that in such a short time? Like, how did you find your critique group, and where'd you start?
Yeah, so I had a couple. One was through SCBWI, so reaching out to them through the Northeast region, and they have a critique group manager or someone in that role doing a wonderful job of trying to help people find pre-existing groups. So one of my groups formed that way. Another is, going back to being in Kidlit contests. A lot of that was people saying, hey, I'm entering this contest. Does anyone have a couple minutes to take a look at my piece? And trading critiques, kind of one-off critiques through that.
This was on social media?
This was through social media.
And what are some of those contests that come to mind in case somebody's looking for them that you found helpful?
There's one called Fall Writing Frenzy. Caitlin Leanne Sanchez and Lydia Lukaitis, I'm probably saying those names terribly wrong, run that. Vivian Kirkfield runs one called 50 Precious Words, which is the 50 word, tell an entire story. There's no other prompt other than that. And then Susanna Leonard Hill has a few contests. She does a holiday one and then a Valentine's Day one. So through that was my first kind of like, hey, I'm here, who else is here?
Right, and how did you find those contests?
Just through searching online. It
like
was
Google
I saw it through Twitter. So there was a couple people I knew within the writing community that I followed at the time. And I kind of just looked at their friends list, and any bio that said, picture book, writer, Kidlit, began to follow those and just kind of like stick my toes in the water a little bit, test it out. Also looking at blogs, but again, I found those through kind of the same means of what are the Kidlit blogs, and that's how I did a lot of my research for agents. Of seeing who was being interviewed, did they mention who their agent was, to start to compile a list and be able to start that process.
Right, that fun query process.
Really fun process, which I kind of snuck out of it a little bit.
I was going to say, if there was serendipity involved, I have a feeling
there was. Mine was very, I owe a lot to social media, which is hilarious because I did nothing on social media, and I would tease my wife endlessly about her time on social media. But my current agent, Dan Kramer, he had put a post out that first 5 people to tag a writing buddy and say something nice about them, I'll do a query critique for.
Oh, wow.
And so I was able to get in on that and sent him my query. He had wonderful things to say, a couple suggestions, reordering, with a little last line of, your story's really interesting. If you want it to, feel free to send it to me.
Wow.
So of course I did. And in a very short turnaround time, he offered representation based on that. So I had only been querying for a couple of months, and really hesitantly at that. I was querying Curly Locks, and then a different story which has not been acquired yet, but fingers crossed one of these days. And that's the story that Dan had seen and offered representation for. So.
And that goes to show the first thing you're trying out there is not always what gets pulled
you don't
apart.
You don't always know. No, and that was one, it got a lot of great feedback. We did go on submission with it. It's made it to acquisitions a few times, and just not the right time, right place, right editor.
Right.
yet.
Right. And so I want to just touch on, how does a person have 3 books coming out in 2 months?
Oh my goodness.
Just curious.
Yeah, yeah.
And is it all the same publisher? Or
No, so that's how.
Okay.
Is the quick answer. The 3 books are with 3 different publishers, and they were submitted at different times. And so the process of being acquired, going through edits, getting the final contract signed, and then where do you fall within their publication timeline and their other books coming out, kind of made this all happen. Curly Locks was supposed to be the first. It was going to be coming out this past fall.
Okay.
But the publisher, they switched distributors. They want to republish some of their backlog. And so this got pushed a little bit. And so all three books went out on submission similar-ish times. But with each contract, there was a kind of right of first refusal for your next book with that publisher. And so we went to them with other books that they chose not to go with. And then we were free to go out on submissions with others. We did not plan for 3 to come out at the same time.
Wow.
I
Did any of them know that you already had one coming out? Like, did that help with the other ones?
Subsequently, they did know. So Ollie, at being the first, was just the first one acquired. The other 2 books, Curly Locks and Hope in the Sea, the editors knew. And I think it's just what fit in with their timeline.
Right.
Curly Locks, they did try and get out sooner, and then it just wasn't able to happen in their timeline of things. So I'm in a publicity whirlwind at the moment of still trying to work full time,
Right.
be a full-time parent, and work on how do I promote books and get the word out, because
it seems like the theme with you. Just all
in all the time. All in all the time. I think that would be my advice to writers.
Okay.
And
Thank you, Andrew.
Yes, segue, right? But my advice to writers is always to do as much as you have the bandwidth for. Protect your mental health, protect your sanity. But in terms of, if there's an opportunity and you're apprehensive, you're not sure, I always say go for it, because you don't know where those dots will connect further down the line. You don't know who you met, or that opportunity, like doing a TV interview that you felt really uncomfortable about, where that could lead you, or who might see that could lead to more opportunities for you, but also as simply as who might see something like this and see one of these books, and it's a book that child needed.
Right.
So not always about the professional growth, but just putting it out there into the world, because then it's a possibility.
Right.
Whereas if you keep it to yourself, that's where it's going to stay.
Right. That's awesome. And because writing and art, it's all about connecting with each other. So say yes, right?
That's absolutely, as long as it works, right?
Well, go ahead, tell me.
And don't be afraid to say no. But if it all becomes too much,
Right.
Publishing is a very, very slow process, and it's not going anywhere.
Except in your case.
Publishing is usually, these still were 2020, and it's now coming out in 2024. So that part of the process still
4 years. That's
still super slow.
right. Well, thank you for saying yes to this interview,
Of course,
Andrew,
thank you for having me.
and queuing me up with that awesome line. I have to just say, it was great hearing about your stories, and you'll be out and about reading these, releasing them in bookstores. I know you're participating in our family-friendly Storytime Art Hour at ACE.
Yes, I can't wait.
In a couple weeks. So I look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. And if anyone else would like to talk to us about your publication process from idea to published book or blog, or however you're publishing, feel free to contact me at Colleen@theroomtowrite.org. Thanks, Andrew.
Of course, thank you.